No. One minute she was complaining about the coffee being too weak, and the next she was on the kitchen floor and I couldn't get her to wake up. That's how it ended. 43 years of marriage, and the last thing my wife ever said to me was that I'd brewed the pot too thin. I keep going back to that morning. The way the October light came through the window above the sink. The little smile she gave me when she set her mug down. The half-eaten piece of toast still on her plate when the paramedics walked in. They told me later it was an aortic dissection. There was nothing anyone could have done. She was 68 years old, healthy as a horse the day before, and gone before the ambulance reached the house. Her name was Hannah. We'd been married since I was 25 and she was 24. And I want you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I never thought of her boys as anything other than mine. I raised them. I taught them to drive. I sat through every miserable Little League game in the rain. I walked the older one down the aisle of the courthouse when his first marriage went sideways and he needed someone to sign as a witness. I co-signed the loan that put the younger one through dental school. None of that mattered to them when she died. Not a single bit of it. Before I get into what happened in that lawyer's office in Asheville, where are you watching this from? I'd genuinely like to know. Drop your city in the comments. Some of you have been through something like this and I want to hear about it. Anna's first husband had been gone almost 40 years by the time she passed. He was a lineman for the power company up in Spartanburg, and he died in 1986 from a fall off a transmission tower. Her boys were 4 and 7 when it happened. I met her 2 years later at a church potluck my sister dragged me to, and I knew within about 10 minutes that I was going to marry her if she'd have me. She had this laugh. I can't describe it any better than that. She had this laugh, and I wanted to spend my life trying to get her to do it again. The boys were 9 and 6 when I came into the picture. The older one, I'll call him by what he asked me to call him back then, which was Bobby. The younger one was Trey. Bobby never warmed up to me. He was old enough to remember his daddy, and he made it clear from the start that I was a placeholder. Trey was different. Trey would crawl into my lap during cartoons and fall asleep with his head on my shoulder. Trey called me Pop until he was about 14, and then he called me by my first name, and then sometime after college he stopped calling me anything at all. I worked 36 years as a structural engineer for a firm in Charlotte. Hannah had her own business, a little catering company that started as her doing finger sandwiches for her bridge club and ended up with 3 employees and a contract with the city school district. She was good at what she did. She was good at everything she did. When the boys were grown and gone, she sold the catering business and we moved up into the mountains, into a place outside Hendersonville, with a porch that wrapped around the whole house and a view of Mount Pisgah on a clear day. That's where she died. That's where I'm sitting right now, telling you this, on that same porch, looking at that same mountain. The funeral was on a Wednesday. The boys flew in the night before. Bobby came alone. Trey brought his wife and their 2 girls, my granddaughters, who I hadn't seen in almost 3 years. The little one didn't recognize me. She hid behind her mother's leg when I bent down to say hello. That hurt worse than I want to admit. After the service, after the casseroles and the awkward hugs from people I barely knew, after the funeral home folks rolled up the chairs and drove away, I came back to the empty house and sat in Hannah's reading chair, and I cried until I couldn't breathe. The boys had gone to a hotel. They didn't ask if I needed company. They didn't ask if I wanted to eat something. Bobby had patted me on the shoulder at the cemetery the way you might pat a stranger's dog, and Trey had hugged me, but it was the kind of hug you give someone you used to know. The next morning, both of them showed up at the house at 9:30. I was still in my bathrobe. I hadn't slept. I made coffee, the kind Hannah liked, with the chicory in it, and I poured 3 cups and sat down at the kitchen table and waited for them to say whatever they'd come to say. Bobby went first. He had a yellow legal pad with him, which should have told me everything I needed to know. He said, "We need to talk about the house." I waited. He said, "Look, we know this is hard, but we have to be practical. Mom worked her whole life for what's in this house. The catering business, the savings, the property up here. That money came from her side. We just want to make sure things go where they're supposed to go. I said, your mother and I have been married for 43 years. Trey said, nobody's saying you didn't love her. We're saying that the assets she brought into the marriage and built up before you sold your business, those should come back to her sons. That's just how it works. I said, that's not how it works at all. That's not how it works at all. That's not how anything works. Bobby flipped a page on his legal pad. He'd written numbers down. He had figured out, based on what he thought the house was worth and what he thought the investment accounts had in them, what he believed I was entitled to keep. The number he came up with was $85,000. He wanted me to sign over the house, the investment accounts, the rental property in Brevard, the timeshare down in Hilton Head, and to walk away with $85,000 and my truck and what he generously called my personal effects. I want you to understand that I was sitting in a kitchen. Hannah and I had picked the tile for her. She had spent 2 whole Saturdays driving around to flooring stores until she found the exact shade of slate she wanted. The cabinets above the sink, I built those. With my own hands. The grandfather clock in the dining room had been her grandmother's, and she'd told me 100 times that she wanted me to have it when she was gone, because she knew I'd wind it every Sunday the way she did. I asked Bobby what he thought I was supposed to do with $85,000. I'm 69 years old. I have a pension and Social Security, sure, but $85,000 isn't a house in this part of the country. $85,000 isn't even a decent down payment. He said, you have a sister in Charlotte. You could move in with her. She has the room. My sister is 74 and lives in a 2-bedroom condo with a yappy little dog and a mountain of unread library books. I love her. I would not survive a week living with her. Trey said, look, we don't want to be the bad guys here. But you have to understand, Mom would have wanted us taken care of. She talked about that. She always said the boys come first. I said, when did she say that? Trey said, all the time. I said, name one specific time. He couldn't. Bobby said, you have until the end of the month to sign the paperwork, otherwise we're going to court. We've already talked to a lawyer down in Asheville, and he says we have a strong case for undue influence and for clawing back what was hers before the marriage. We don't want it to come to that, but we will if we have to. The end of the month was 19 days away. They had buried their mother on a Wednesday and were threatening to sue me on a Thursday. I asked them to leave my house. Bobby said, it's not your house. I asked them again, and this time my voice did something I wasn't expecting it to do, and they got up and left. I called my own attorney that afternoon. His name was Frederick. He'd handled my will and Hannah's will in a fender bender I had in 2009. I'd known him for 20-some years. He came up to the house the next day, which was a Friday, and he sat at that same kitchen table where the boys had drawn their lines in the sand, and he listened to me lay it all out. When I was done, he took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes, the way he does when he's about to tell you something he doesn't want to tell you. He said, here's the thing. Hannah's will, the one she made with me 10 years ago, leaves everything to you. That's clear. But under North Carolina law, if you'd been married less than the threshold and there were assets she brought into the marriage from before, the kids could maybe make some noise. You've been married long enough that none of that should matter. But, I said, but what? He said, but the will I have is 10 years old. Did she ever update it? Did she ever do anything with another attorney? Did she have any documents you don't know about? I told him I didn't think so. Hannah was a meticulous person. She kept a folder in the safe in the bedroom closet labeled Impertent Pappers, and I knew everything in that folder because she'd shown it to me herself last year after her sister had a stroke, and she got worried about being prepared. The folder had her will, our marriage license, the deeds, the insurance policies, the title to her car. That was it. Frederick said, you should fight them. We have a strong position. They have nothing. The will is clean. 43 years of marriage. Joint titling on most of the property. They are bluffing, and we should call their bluff. I told him I'd think about it. I want to tell you what I did that weekend, because it matters to what came after. I went into our bedroom, the bedroom Hannah and I had shared for 31 years in that house, and I sat on her side of the bed for a long time. I pulled open the drawer of her nightstand. There was a pair of reading glasses, a tube of hand cream, a paperback she'd been halfway through, and a small leather notebook she used to write down recipes and grocery lists, and sometimes little notes to herself. I read every page of that notebook. The last entry was from the Sunday before she died. It said, "Remind myself to ask him about Maine for the anniversary." She'd been planning to take me to Maine in the spring for our 44th. I sat on her side of the bed, and I made up my mind. I called Frederick on Monday morning, and I told him I wasn't going to fight. I told him I was going to sign whatever they wanted me to sign. He spent 45 minutes trying to talk me out of it. He told me I was making a mistake, that I would regret it, that Hannah would not have wanted this. I told him that what Hannah would have wanted was for her sons not to have to fight in court over her body before the dirt had even settled. I told him that if those boys needed her things so badly that they were willing to come at me 4 days after burying her, then they could have her things, and I'd take the $85,000 and figure out the rest. He said, "Please, just let me set up one meeting with their attorney before you sign anything. Just so we go in with our eyes open." I said, "Fine." The meeting was set for the following Wednesday at the offices of the boy's lawyer, a man named Coulter, in a glass building downtown in Asheville. I drove down by myself. Frederick met me in the parking lot. He looked tired. He told me he'd been on the phone with Coulter the day before, and that Coulter had been smug about the whole thing, treating it like a done deal. We went up to the 18th floor. The conference room had a view of the Blue Ridge Mountains, and I remember thinking how strange it was that something so beautiful could be the backdrop for something so ugly. Bobby and Trey were already seated. Coulter was at the head of the table. He had a stack of documents in front of him, neatly tabbed with little colored flags. Coulter stood up and shook my hand and called me sir, which I appreciated even though I knew it was just lawyer manners. He said he was sorry for my loss. Bobby and Trey didn't make eye contact with me. They were both looking at the table. Coulter walked us through the offer. The numbers were the same as what Bobby had told me at the kitchen table. House to be transferred. Investment accounts to be liquidated and distributed. Rental property and timeshare to be put on the market and the proceeds split between the two of them. I would receive a check for $85,000 and would have 90 days to vacate the residence. He slid the documents across the table to Frederick. Frederick took out his reading glasses and started going through them page by page. He took his time. I could tell he was looking for something he could use to convince me to walk out, but the documents were what they were. They were standard. They were what we'd discussed. After about 20 minutes, Frederick looked up at me. He said, "You're sure?" I said, "I was sure." He passed me a pen. I started signing. I signed the transfer of the house. I signed the reassignment of the investment accounts. I signed the release of any claim to the rental property and the timeshare. I signed and signed and signed, and with each signature I could see Bobby's shoulders relaxing a little bit more, and I could see Trey starting to look at me again in that uncertain way he used to look at me when he was 8 years old and had done something he wasn't proud of. When I finished, Coulter gathered up the documents and squared them on the table. He smiled. It was a small, professional smile, but it was a smile. He said, "Well, I think that wraps things up. Gentlemen, I'll have my paralegal send copies of the executed documents to your attorney by end of day." Bobby actually said thank you to me. He said, "Thank you. We appreciate this." That's when Frederick cleared his throat. He said, "Before we adjourn, there's actually one more matter. A document came into my possession yesterday that I think the parties should be aware of." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila envelope. It was sealed. He set it on the table. Coulter said, "What is this?" Frederick said, "This was delivered to my office yesterday morning by a courier from the law offices of a woman named Patricia Halloway in Greenville. Apparently, Hannah retained Miss Halloway approximately 8 months ago to draft a supplemental document. The document was held in escrow at Ms. Holloway's office with instructions that it be delivered to me in the event of Hannah's death, but only to be opened in the presence of all named beneficiaries. I have not opened it. Per the instructions, I'm opening it now. I want to tell you that I knew what was in that envelope. I want to tell you that Hannah had told me, that we had talked about it, that I'd been sitting on this twist the whole time and just waiting to spring it. But I didn't know. I had no idea. I sat there in that conference room with a pen still in my hand and watched Frederick break the seal on that envelope and pull out a stack of papers, and I had no more clue what was about to happen than Bobby or Trey did. Frederick read the cover sheet. He said, "This is a holographic codicil to the last will and testament, dated February of this year, witnessed by 2 attorneys at the firm of Holloway & Associates, and notarized by a third party. It supersedes the previous will dated 2014 only with respect to the matter specifically addressed within." Coulter stood up. He said, "Hold on, we need to verify this. We need time to review." Frederick said, "Of course. Take all the time you need, but the document is valid on its face, and I'm going to read the operative paragraph for the record." Bobby said, "What does it say?" Frederick adjusted his glasses. He looked at me first, just for a second, and I could see something in his eyes that I hadn't seen the whole drive down. It was a kind of held breath relief. Then he looked down at the page, and he started reading. He read, "I, Hannah, being of sound mind, and having watched the way my 2 sons have conducted themselves toward my husband over the past several years, particularly with respect to their assumptions about my estate and their treatment of him at our family gatherings, do hereby establish the following. All assets held in my name, jointly or severally, including but not limited to the residence in Hendersonville, the investment accounts, the rental property, the timeshare, and any proceeds from the sale of the catering business previously held in trust, shall pass in their entirety to my husband, in the event that either of my sons attempts to challenge this distribution, or attempts to coerce my husband into any agreement that would deprive him of these assets, in whole or in part, then both of my sons shall be permanently disinherited from the residual estate, including the trust accounts established in their names by their grandmother in 2003, currently valued at approximately $1.4 million combined. I want you to picture this conference room with me. 18th floor. Blue Ridge Mountains out the window. A long table of polished wood. Coulter, standing up with his hand frozen halfway to his tie. Bobby's face going the color of skim milk. Trey's mouth open like he was about to say something but couldn't remember what. Frederick wasn't done. He kept reading. He read, "The trust accounts referenced above, established by my late mother for the benefit of my sons, contain a clause requiring distribution to be approved by the surviving trustee. As of the date of this codicil, the surviving trustee is my husband. He shall have sole and unreviewable discretion to distribute, withhold, or redirect those funds in any manner he sees fit, including but not limited to charitable donation, in the event that the conditions described in this codicil are violated." Coulter sat back down. There was a long, long silence. Bobby was the one who finally spoke. He said, "This can't be real." Frederick said, "You're welcome to have your attorney verify it. The witnesses are local, the notary is local. I'd suggest you do so quickly, because the documents your client just signed are also valid, and they explicitly reference this codicil in the indemnification language on page 7, which neither of you appears to have read. I want to tell you what I did at this point. I want to tell you that I stood up and made a speech, that I delivered some perfect cinematic line, that I walked out with my head high and the music swelling. I didn't do any of that. I sat in that chair and I started crying. Not the dignified kind of crying either, the kind where your nose runs and your shoulders shake and you make embarrassing sounds. I was crying because Hannah had known. She had seen all of it. She had seen the way Bobby looked at the catering company books when he came to visit, the way Trey had asked her 3 different times that last Christmas about the value of the lake house we used to own, the way both of them had stopped calling unless they wanted something. She had seen it before I had let myself see it. And she had quietly, 8 months before she died, walked into a lawyer's office in Greenville, where she had a hairdresser appointment every 6 weeks, where neither of her sons would ever have thought to look, and she had built a fence around me. She had built a fence around me to keep me safe from her own children. And she had done it without telling me, because she knew that if she told me, I would have argued with her. I would have said, "They're not like that. They wouldn't do that to me." And she would have had to tell me, "Yes, they would. They will." And I don't think she could bear to say it out loud. After I pulled myself together, Frederick walked me through what was going to happen next. The documents I'd signed that morning had been drafted by Coulter, and they had a standard clause referencing any superseding instruments. The codicil was a superseding instrument. The transfers I'd just executed would have to be unwound, but that was paperwork, and Coulter was going to be the one doing it whether he liked it or not, because Bobby and Trey were now staring down the barrel of losing $1.4 million in trust money on top of getting nothing from their mother. Bobby said, "Please, please, we didn't know." I said, "You didn't know." I said, "You didn't know what?" He said, "We didn't know she felt that way. We didn't know she would do this." I said, "Your mother knew exactly who you were. She loved you anyway. That was her grace, not yours." Trey said, "Can we talk? Just the two of us. Outside." I said no. I said no, and I meant it. And I want to tell you something. I'd thought on the drive down to Asheville that morning that the thing I was most afraid of was being broke and homeless at 69. I was wrong. The thing I was most afraid of was sitting across a table from Hannah's children and not being able to find anything in their faces that reminded me of her. And I had just spent 2 hours doing exactly that. I left the conference room. Frederick stayed behind to handle the paperwork. I rode the elevator down by myself, and I walked out of that glass building into the parking lot. And the November air hit me in the chest, and I sat in my truck for 20 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. I want to tell you what came after, because I think it matters. Bobby called me a week later. He was trying to be nice. He was trying to remind me that he was my son. He used those words. He said, "I'm still your son, Pop." That word, Pop, that he hadn't called me in 25 years. He used it like a key, like he was trying to unlock something. He told me that he understood I was angry, but that we needed to find a way past this, because his daughter was getting married in May, and he wanted me there. I told him I'd think about it. He kept calling. About once a week, at first, and then every couple of weeks when I didn't return them, he left voicemails. The voicemails got more honest as the months went on. The first ones were apologies that sounded like they'd been written by his lawyer. The later ones were just him talking about his memories of going to Carowinds with me when he was 12, about the time I drove 4 hours each way to bail him out of a holding cell in Athens after he got into a bar fight in college, about the fact that he didn't know what to do with himself now that his mother was gone and he'd burned the only other parent he had. Trey didn't call. Trey wrote me a letter, an actual paper letter, 6 pages long, on yellow legal paper. I read it twice and put it in a drawer. Maybe one day I'll write him back. Maybe I won't. The trust money has been sitting in those accounts for 3 years now. I haven't touched it. I haven't redirected it. The codicil gives me the right to do whatever I want with it, including give it all to charity. And Bobby and Trey both know that. They know that every month that passes is a month I could decide to write them out for good. I think Hannah meant for it to work that way. I think she wanted them to spend the rest of their lives understanding that the man they tried to throw out of his own house was holding their futures in his hand, and that he had every right to crush them, and that the only reason he hadn't was because he was a better person than they had ever bothered to find out. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with that money. I think about it most days. I'm telling you all of this from the porch in Hendersonville. Same porch. Same view of Mount Pisgah. The grandfather clock from Hannah's grandmother is in the dining room behind me, and I wind it every Sunday like she did. The kitchen tile is still that exact shade of slate. I had a young couple come look at the house last spring, because I thought maybe I should sell it and move somewhere smaller. And the woman walked into the living room and said, "Oh my God, this is the warmest house I've ever been in." And I told them the next day that I'd changed my mind. I'm not leaving this house. They'll carry me out of it. I want to leave you with something, because I know some of you are watching this and going through your own version of it. There is a difference between people who love you and people who love what you can do for them. The love that lasts will sit with you in a kitchen at 4 a.m. when you can't sleep. The love that doesn't last will show up 19 days after a funeral with a yellow legal pad. Find the people who love you for the 4 a.m. version of you. Keep them close, and if you have any doubt at all about whether the people in your life are the first kind or the second kind, pay attention to how they treat the person you love most when that person isn't in the room. That'll tell you everything. Hannah knew what to look for. She watched for years, and she made her decisions without making a sound, and she protected me from beyond the grave. I didn't deserve her. I don't think I ever did, but she gave me her life anyway. And now she's given me the rest of mine, and I'm going to spend every day I have left being worthy of that. If this story spoke to something in you, leave a comment and tell me about it. I read all of them, I really do. And if you've got someone in your life right now who's loved you the way Hannah loved me, go call them. Don't wait until the coffee gets too weak and the kitchen floor is the last place they ever stand. Call them now. I'll see you on the next one. I've thought about this for 3 years now, sitting on this porch every morning with my coffee, and I keep coming back to the same handful of truths. The first one is this: people show you who they are when they think nothing is watching them. Bobby and Trey didn't become greedy after Hannah died. They'd been greedy for a long time, in small ways, and Hannah had been quietly cataloging it while I had been making excuses for them. I was their stepfather, and I loved them, and I decided long before any of this happened that I was going to see them as good men because that was easier than seeing them clearly. That was my mistake. It was a kindness on the surface and a cowardice underneath. Anna saw them clearly, and she still loved them, and she did the harder thing. She protected the truth instead of protecting her feelings about the truth. That's a kind of courage I didn't have, and I'm trying to learn it now, late as it is. The second one is about what happened in that conference room. I want to be careful here, because I don't want it to sound like I'm bragging. I'm not. The reason I signed every paper Coulter put in front of me wasn't strategy. I didn't know about the codicil. I signed because I had decided that I would rather lose everything I owned than spend the rest of my life in a courtroom with the boys I had raised. That decision was the only thing I had any control over that day, and I made it on principle, not on calculation. The fact that Hannah had already prepared a different ending was her gift, not my cleverness. But here's what I learned. When you do the right thing for the right reason, sometimes the universe will surprise you, and sometimes it won't. And either way, you have to be able to live with yourself when the dust settles. I would have walked out of that building with $85,000 and a clean conscience. That would have been enough. The codicil was a bonus, not a vindication. The third truth is the hardest one. Bobby still calls me. Trey wrote me a letter I haven't answered. I have it in my power every single day to ruin both of their lives by making one phone call to redirect that trust money. I don't do it, not because they deserve mercy, because they don't, but because becoming the kind of man who would punish them is a worse fate than anything they've already done to me. Hannah didn't give me that codicil so I could become small. She gave it to me so I could remain who I was. So I sit out here, and I wind the clock, and I keep choosing not to be the worst version of myself. That's the work. That's the only work that matters at